All right, today we're going to be doing section 2.8, which is solving our quadratic equations by using the zero product property. So we have some steps over here. Step one is we're going to factor. So we're going to factor it just like we've been doing. So you ignore that equal zero part and just factor this left side here. So the way I like to do these when they are trinomials is I like to do the slide and divide. So, oops, gotta get a pen. So for my diamond, my top number would be a -15, bottom would be -2, and so a -5 and a +3 would be my two numbers on the side. And then I would divide them both by 1, which I don't usually like to write. So I go ahead and put my factors into my parentheses. So we have x minus 5 and x plus 3. So nothing new on our first step there. Step number 2 is you're going to set each factor equal to 0. So both of our parentheses, those are our factors. So we're going to set the left one equal to 0, so x minus 5 equal to 0, and the other one, x plus 3 equal to 0. And then step 3 is we just solve for x. So we have two different equations now, and we're just going to solve them both to get x by itself. So we add 5 on both sides for this one. So one of my answers is x equals 5. And the other equation looks like we're going to subtract 3 on both sides, so the other answer is x equals -3. There we go. Perfect. So one thing to note is you will always have 2, sometimes 3 exponents. Or, sorry, not exponents, answers. 2, sometimes 3 answers. Okay, now let's try this next example. Again, we have 3 terms, so we're going to go ahead and use our diamond. If you like to do grouping, go ahead and do your grouping. So my 2 goes on the top, -3 on the bottom. So my side numbers would be a -2 and a -1 because they multiply to be +2, add to be -3. And again, there's no number in front, so I just divide by 1, which I usually don't write. So we would get x minus 2 for one parenthesis and x minus 1 for our other parenthesis, and it's still equal to 0. So we set both factors equal to 0. So x minus 2 is equal to 0, and x minus 1 is equal to 0. So then when we solve them, we have to add 2, and we get x is equal to a +2. And over here we add 1, so we get x is equal to a +1. One thing to notice about your answers here is if you like to do the diamond here and slide and divide, the numbers on your side are actually your answers, but in the opposite sign. So since it's a -2, my answer ended up being a +2. Since it's a -1, answer ended up being +1. Okay, now let's try one where our front number was not 1. So let's go ahead and do our diamond. We're going to multiply the 2 and the -21, which would be -42. And then down below we have a -1. So my side numbers on this one looks like they're going to be a -7 and a +6. So now we have to divide by our front number, so we have our 2 underneath both of those. -7 over 2 we can't simplify, so we'll just bottoms up and do 2x minus 7. 6 over 2 we can simplify to a +3, so we get x plus 3 is still equal to 0. So now we write our two equations. We've got our two factors. We're going to go ahead and set them both equal to 0. So 2x minus 7 equals 0. X plus 3 equals 0. So if we solve our left one, we're going to add 7 on both sides. So we have 2x equals 7. And then last step to get x by itself is we'll have to divide by 2. So our answer is x equals 7/2 for that one. And then for the other one, we just subtract 3 and we get x equals -3. So again, you can see that our fractions inside here, it's the exact same thing, only opposite sign. So since I had a -7/2 in my diamond, my answer is a +7/2. Same with my 3, it's a +3, so the answer is -3. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to tell you, hopefully you've been doing these examples I've been doing instead of the ones on your notes. I believe mine are a little bit different, so please do these ones in my video here rather than the ones that are already printed in your notes. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this last one. Now this one's a little different because it's not already equal to 0 like the other ones we've been doing. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is make it equal to 0. We have to do that first before we start factoring. So I always like to move my stuff over to the left side. So since this is a positive 6x, I'm going to subtract 6x. And I have to subtract it from the other term that has an x. So I'm going to subtract it from the 18x. Now I'm also going to have to move this negative 12 over. So let's go ahead and add 12 to both sides as well. I'm adding it to my other constant that I have, that 24. So now on the left side, those two both cancel out, and I'm left with a 0. Or sorry, that was the right side. And then on the left side, I now have 4x squared minus 24x plus 36. Awesome. Now it looks like we can take out a GCF. So 4 is going to go into all of those. So we take our 4 out. We have x squared minus 6x and then plus 9 equal to 0. And then again, we just factor it with our diamond, or grouping if you prefer that method. So my 9 goes in front, my negative 6 on the bottom. So my two numbers are going to be negative 3 and negative 3. And it doesn't look like there's anything in front to divide by. So my factor, or my equation with my factors, would be x minus 3 and x minus 3. And then let's not forget our 4 in front. Now this time we have 3 factors, right? We have our 2 factors and that are in parentheses and our factor in front here. So we have to set all 3 of them equal to 0. So we have 4 equals 0, x minus 3 equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. Now 4 equals 0, there's really not a variable to solve for there, so we can just go ahead and get rid of that. Sometimes, for example, in your homework, you might have to factor out a variable. So let's say maybe this was a x that you factored out. You would have to set x equal to 0, and that would be one of your answers. Okay, so that's kind of what you do with that GCF you take out. But since it was a 4, we don't have to worry about that in this example. But on your homework, there will be some with a variable out front. Okay, now let's solve these other two. We're going to add 3 to both sides. We get x equals 3 as one answer. And looks like we end up with the same answer as the other one. Now you don't have to write it 2 times, but I would prefer you write it 2 times so that way you know you're always getting 2 answers, sometimes 3. Sweet.